Hey everyone, ready to dive into some seriously ancient wisdom that, believe it or not, can still help us navigate today's world.
Sounds intriguing. I'm ready.
We're talking Stoicism, and no, not just for philosophers in togas. This is about finding inner peace amidst, well, all the chaos. And honestly, its insights are shockingly relevant to what we face today.
I agree. It's amazing how these ideas from centuries ago can still resonate so strongly in our modern lives.
Right. Many folks hear Stoicism and picture emperors and ancient Greece, but what's cool is how these ideas can help us right now deal with stress, make tough calls, even find more meaning in our everyday lives.
Exactly. It's about taking those ancient principles and seeing how they apply to our relationships, our work, even just how we react to a stressful day.
Totally. And what's wild is that Stoicism actually popped up during a time of, well, huge upheaval, kind of like our own, right?
Used to think crumbling empires, constant uncertainty.
So like not so different from our 2047 news cycle anxieties.
It was a philosophy practically born from a need for inner strength. And those ideas, they really resonate today even more.
Absolutely. And we're going to meet some of the biggest names in Stoicism, from a shipwrecked merchant, which is a story in itself, to a Roman emperor.
And unpack their wisdom for, well, for us now.
Exactly. So let's start basic. What exactly is Stoicism?
Well, picture this 3rd century BCE, that's before Common Era in Greece. We meet a guy named Zeno of Citium.
Zeno of City. Okay, I'm picturing it.
Zeno was a successful merchant, sailing the seas, doing his thing, when boom, shipwreck. Loses everything.
Oh, wow. Talk about a life-changing.
Right, now you'd expect, I don't know, despair.
Totally.
But Zeno, he dives headfirst into philosophy. And what emerges? Stoicism. It's this whole school of thought centered on virtue and resilience, especially when things get tough.
Talk about turning a negative into a positive.
Right, and get this, he taught in a public colonnade, like a covered walkway, not some exclusive academy or anything.
So it was for everyone from the get-go.
Exactly. Stoicism, from day one, was meant for everyone, not just the elite.
Almost like they knew we'd need these tools centuries later, huh?
It's true.
I mean, maybe we're not facing shipwrecks literally, but the stock market, the pressure of our always-on world, kind of similar, right?
The parallels are definitely there.
Yeah.
And the Stoics, they didn't shy away from challenges. They believed that by understanding and accepting reality, good and bad, we could find a path to a more fulfilling life.
So not about pretending everything's perfect.
No,
Yeah.
not at all. And that path wasn't about withdrawing from the world either. It was about engaging with it, but in a more conscious, ethical way, guided by reason and virtue.
So not about being emotionless robots.
Not at all. It's more about learning to manage our emotions,
Mhm.
understanding where they come from, not letting them completely control us.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Think of it this way. Have you ever acted impulsively based on emotions, and then later you're like, why'd I do that?
Probably all the time, if I'm being honest.
The Stoics would say that by practicing certain techniques, like recognizing and naming our emotions as they come up, we can create a space between the feeling and, reacting.
Okay, so you're not suppressing the feeling, you're just choosing how to respond.
Exactly. That space lets us make more reasoned, thoughtful choices, even when we feel stressed or angry.
Which, let's be real, is most of the time these days.
Right. And that's where another Stoic superstar comes in, Epictetus.
Mm-hmm.
Now, his story is incredible. Born into slavery, he becomes this incredibly influential teacher.
Wow. Talk about resilience, not just to endure those circumstances, but to rise above them and share that wisdom.
Exactly. It speaks to the power of our own minds, really, which Epictetus emphasized in his teachings. He believed that true freedom comes from within, that no matter what's happening around us, we always have control over our thoughts, our reactions.
Easier said than done, though, right?
Absolutely takes practice. But he summed it up with a quote that's as relevant today as it was back then. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters.
Wow. That's powerful.
It is, isn't it? And it leads us to a core Stoic principle, the dichotomy of control.
Dichotomy of control. Sounds complicated.
It sounds complicated, but it's actually pretty simple. The Stoics believe that so much of our suffering comes from focusing on things outside of our control. The weather, the economy, what other people think of us.
Okay, so like if my flight gets delayed, I can't control the airline, I can't control the weather.
Exactly. But you can control how you react to that situation.
Instead of getting angry, which never actually helps.
Right. The Stoic approach would be to accept that you can't change the traffic, but you can choose how you spend those minutes. Maybe you listen to a podcast or take some deep breaths or mentally prepare for that meeting.
It's about finding that sense of agency, even in situations where it feels like we have zero control.
Exactly. And that shift in perspective, it can be incredibly freeing because it lets us focus our energy on things we can influence. Our thoughts, our actions, our reactions, instead of wasting it on things we can't control.
It's like a mental decluttering, almost. You're letting go of all those anxieties and worries about things you can't change anyway and focusing on what you can do in this moment.
Exactly. It's almost like they're saying true freedom comes not from having endless options, but from mastering our inner world so we can respond to anything life throws at us with wisdom, clarity.
And that brings us to our final Stoic superstar. This guy is like a celebrity in the Stoic world, Marcus Aurelius.
Oh, absolutely. Marcus Aurelius is a favorite.
And he wasn't just some philosopher in an ivory tower, right?
Right. We're not talking abstract theories here.
This guy was the emperor of Rome, leading during a time of, well, everything. War, plague.
Talk about high pressure.
And yet, he found the time to write. Not grand treatises, but these really personal reflections on living a Stoic life.
Collected in what we now know as Meditations, which I have to say, it's one of those books I keep coming back to.
It's fascinating because this wasn't even meant to be published. It was like his own personal journal.
Exactly, his own personal reflections, and yet here we are centuries later, finding so much wisdom and guidance in his words.
It's like proof that some things are timeless,
Yeah.
this need for inner peace, inner strength.
Absolutely, it's a universal human need.
And you know what I find so inspiring about Marcus Aurelius? He doesn't pretend it's easy. He
Exactly.
doesn't shy away from how hard it can be to actually live by these principles. He talks about the struggles, the temptations, those very human moments of frustration, doubt.
It makes it feel attainable, like this isn't about achieving some kind of stoic perfection. It's about the daily practice, continually trying to live by those virtues even when we stumble, because we all stumble.
And that's a really important point. The Stoics weren't about pretending we don't have emotions. They recognized that, well, we're human. Emotions are part of the deal.
It's about learning to observe those emotions
Right.
without being swept away by them.
Right. It's like creating a little space between you and what you're feeling so that you can choose how to respond wisely, not just react on autopilot.
Exactly. Like, okay, I'm feeling anxious right now. That's okay. I can acknowledge that without letting it dictate my actions.
So much easier said than done.
Oh, absolutely. It takes practice. It's a skill, just like any other. And this is where some of those practical tools the Stoics offered come in.
Tools. Like what?
Well, Seneca, for example, was a huge advocate for journaling.
That's interesting.
He saw it as a way to, really examine your thoughts, your behaviors, but more objectively, to help identify patterns, see your own progress.
So even back then, they understood the value of self-reflection.
Oh, absolutely. And Marcus Aurelius did it too. Think about it. They didn't have social media, 24/7 news cycles, and they still recognized the importance of taking time for themselves, to step back, examine their lives from a more philosophical perspective.
It's like hitting the pause button.
Yeah.
On that never-ending stream of thoughts and feelings, creating space to just be, I don't know, more mindful, more intentional.
Exactly. And that's something we could all use a little more of these days, whether you call it journaling, meditation, or just taking a few minutes to reflect at the end of the day. That self-awareness is crucial for a more stoic and probably a more fulfilling life.
Totally. And speaking of practical tools, we have to talk about that dichotomy of control we mentioned earlier.
Oh, it's such a key principle.
Remembering to separate what we can control from what we can't, it's easy to forget in the moment.
It is, but it's also where things get really interesting, because
Yeah.
when you actually start applying this principle to your everyday life, it can really shift your perspective.
So give us an example. How do we actually use this dichotomy of control thing?
Okay, imagine you're stuck in traffic, you're late for a meeting, and you can't control the other cars, the weather, any of it, right?
The worst. It's like my go-to stress dream.
Right. But you can control how you react to that situation. Ask yourself, will getting angry actually help me get there faster?
Not in my experience. If anything, it just makes the whole thing more miserable.
Exactly. The Stoic approach in that moment is to accept that you can't change the traffic, but you can choose how you spend those minutes. Maybe you listen to a podcast, you take some deep breaths, or you use that time to mentally prepare for the meeting.
Okay, I can see how that would be helpful.
It's about finding that sense of agency, even in situations where we feel powerless. Because we always have a choice.
It's like reclaiming that power.
And that's where that idea of virtue we were talking about comes back in.
Virtue, right. So it's not just about accepting everything. It's about choosing how we act within that.
Exactly. Once you're clear on what you can control, Stoicism asks, how will you act? And that's where striving to live by those virtues, wisdom, justice, courage, temperance, becomes essential.
They become what, like our guiding principles?
Exactly. They help us navigate those difficult decisions, those challenging situations where it's not always obvious what the right thing to do is.
Which is, most of the time.
Right. Life is complicated, but the Stoics remind us that it's not about being morally perfect. It's about the striving, the commitment to trying to align our actions with those virtues even when it's difficult.
It's in those moments of challenge, I think, that we really grow.
Yeah,
When we have to make those tough choices, choose the more difficult path, the more virtuous path.
it really is like building a muscle. The more we exercise that virtue muscle by making those tough choices, the stronger it becomes.
I like that. The virtue muscle. I need to hit the gym.
We all do. And the Stoics offer some great advice for those times when you're struggling, when those virtue muscles are getting a real workout.
Oh, you tell?
One of their most powerful insights was the importance of remembering our shared humanity.
Shared humanity.
They understood that, hey, life is tough. We all face setbacks, disappointments. It's part of being human. And they believed that by really cultivating a sense of empathy and compassion for ourselves and for others, we could better navigate those difficult times. It's that beautiful idea that no matter how put together we may seem, successful, powerful, whatever, we're all in this together, all navigating the ups and downs of being human.
And that vulnerability, it can actually be a source of strength, not something to hide from.
Exactly. It connects us. And what's fascinating is how much this ancient philosophy lines up with modern psychology.
Oh, how so?
Well, we know now that self-compassion is essential for resilience, managing stress, even just making positive changes.
So it's not about letting ourselves off the hook for messing up.
No, it's about treating ourselves with kindness, the same kindness and understanding we'd offer, a close friend.
It's funny how we often give more grace to others than we do ourselves.
See. It's so true. And when we can extend that same compassion outward to others, acknowledging their struggles, celebrating their successes, it creates a more supportive, fulfilling way to move through the world.
It's like they were onto something back then, these Stoics. Tapping into this, timeless wisdom about human nature that we're only now rediscovering.
Absolutely, they really were.
So as we wrap up our Stoicism deep dive, what's resonating with you most? What are you walking away with?
For me, it keeps coming back to that emphasis on what we can control. It's so easy to get caught up in everything outside of that, the news, social media, what other people think.
All the things we can't actually control but stress about anyway.
Exactly. But the Stoics, they remind us that our real power lies in how we respond to all of that. It's about focusing on our thoughts, our actions, our reactions, the things we can actually do something about.
So it's really about recognizing that circle of control and focusing our energy there, which honestly sounds like a recipe for way less stress.
Right. It's a practice, though. It's not like we're all going to achieve Stoic perfection overnight. But even just remembering these principles when we're in the thick of it, facing a challenge, it can make a difference.
It's like building a muscle. Like you were saying earlier, the more we exercise that focus muscle by bringing our attention back to what we can control, the stronger it gets.
Exactly. And what I love is that the Stoics recognized the importance of this kind of mental training. And they gave us these incredible tools like journaling, self-reflection, mindfulness, that are just as effective today as they were centuries ago.
They were like the OG cognitive behavioral therapists. They understood that our thoughts have this incredible power over our emotions, our behaviors. And they didn't just talk about it, they offered strategies, practical ways to cultivate a more, positive, resilient mindset.
Exactly. And they were right there in the trenches with us. These weren't just abstract theories for them. They were living these principles, facing shipwrecks, navigating the Roman court, leading empires.
It makes you think. If they could find that strength and guidance from Stoicism in those circumstances, maybe we can too.
Absolutely.
Even with our deadlines and commutes and to-do lists, those ancient ideas can still offer some perspective, a sense of purpose.
A little ancient wisdom for our modern lives. I love that.
Right. So next time you find yourself feeling overwhelmed, remember those Stoic superstars. Take a deep breath, focus on what you can control, and ask yourself, what's the virtuous path here?
It might surprise you what you discover.
That's a great place to leave it. Until next time, keep diving.